Hello guys and welcome to Field of Glory Empires. This is going to be a beginner's guide on how to play the game. I will try to condense all the information that you need to know in something digestible for a beginner that does not leave anything super important out. Before we get started, I do want to mention that this is part of a bigger playlist of guides you can find in the playlist below if you want to learn more or go deeper, and I will continue to add to it. But let's get into it. So, Field of Glory Empires. If you wish to start a new game, you're actually going to want to pick scenarios. This is a little weird. Usually it's like new game somewhere before a load, but it is scenarios that you are looking for. There is multiplayer, but this is asynchronous and maybe should not be your first go-to for learning how to play the game. So scenarios is what we want. And here we'll have a nice little screen where you'll have difficulty options that you can pick from in, I believe there's 7 of these. I'm not going to count it again. 6 of, let's say, 7 of these, you will play while giving bonuses to the AI. There is only one difficulty that does not give bonuses to the AI, and that is easy. Balanced is not balanced. Balanced is the player gets debuffs. Think about like normal mode in Total War, where the AI gets a bunch of bonuses that helps them do things the player could never imagine doing. You're not playing balanced. So just note though that there is a huge difference between easy and balanced, way bigger than balanced and experience. So when you pick this, you want to be careful. If you play on balance, the AI will get some bonuses that you will not get, and that can maybe be difficult in the beginning as a brand new player. You don't really know what's going on. However, if you play easy, you will actually disable entire mechanics of the game that the game is kind of balanced around, which will make the game way easier than just simply giving the AI a couple penalties, because it doesn't mention this, but you're actually turning off entire systems of the game, such as administrative burden, which you'll see me bring up in a little bit. But let's say we're going with balanced. Now you have to pick your campaign. Just note, because this is so confusing, this start, that I feel like I need to explain it. Because, you know, since when is normal, balanced, something with a player's debuff? That is so weird. And since when is the first I'm going to rant about this every time I see it. The first campaign that you are defaulted to selecting is not something you can even play. It is prompting you, if you go ahead and select the default campaign, it's going to prompt you to pay more money. It's very unfortunate that they did this. I don't know why they thought that would be respectable to someone that paid them money, but here we are. You need to first select something else. This symbol right here is popping out at you because it's showing you that you don't own this and they want you to buy it. That's what this is. This is a DLC. The Grand Campaign of 310 BC, this is what we're looking for. This is the new game. So you have to go to scenarios, not new game. You got to be careful about the difficulty, and then you got to select the second scenario to get the actual base game, the new game. The purest scenario is a very short 15-turn scenario between 2 locations, essentially, where it's kind of just meant to be an example, an introduction to military and fighting. The Grand Campaign is really what you want if you're going for a actual full scenario. So let's get into that. I spent way more time on that than I wanted to, but here we are. As you load into the game, you will get access to nation selection, and most of the information that you're going to see here is actually not really important. Context, this is just, none of this matters. This only is giving you flavor text. This doesn't really matter. This is the only thing that really matters. Who you're playing as and who you're at war with. Then at gameplay, they're trying to tell you the bonuses and problems the nation will encounter. This can be helpful, but in my opinion, it's very opinionated, and I don't find that it translates into an actual good representation of your starting situation. You kind of just have to feel that out. And then modifiers, this is probably more important. You get to see certain modifiers. Of course, you won't know what any of these mean, or if they change, or what they do. Some of these do change, some of these don't change. For example, can you pick them out? No, you can't, because the tooltips don't really tell you that. But one thing is like military expertise. for example. This can change. And some of these other things, like builders, you can actually pay to change through a very rare event. They also rank it by difficulty. This is not an accurate representation. They also rank it by interest. That is just completely opinionated. What if someone does not care about Rome? 5 out of 5. Ignore this. Ignore this. The modifiers are the only things really worth gleaming and checking if you're at any wars in the beginning. Then just find something that is interesting to you. If you want my quick opinion, I'll make a more detailed guide on nations a different time, but my quick opinion on what you should play as in this game is, obviously games like this are built around Rome, so Rome is overpowered, it's more fleshed out, it's designed to be, that's just the point of games in this era, the rise of the Roman Republic, and this one to the beginnings of the Roman Empire. The successor kingdoms of Alexander are of course very interesting, but for a new player, do you really want to be managing something this large and fighting nations that are the biggest and strongest on the map? I don't think you do, especially not in this game. Maybe in something more like Imperial Rome. In fact, I would recommend that you consider a lot of nations the game would consider to be more difficult and less interesting at the beginning. My first one was Saba, but anything the size of Ethiopia or a lot of things around like Britannia, these are great in my opinion for learning the game, especially because a lot of them don't start out in any wars and you just get to learn the mechanics of building, etc. Rome is kind of small enough to do that, but you do start out in a war if you want to be pressured and challenged from the start, but fight someone that you are advantaged in comparison to. So those are the choices. I'm gonna load up Rome for continuing this tutorial. When you do start the game, depending what nation you start with, you'll get some kind of pop-up that will inform you on the situation. This is about as useful, I find, as the interest and difficulty ratings. I find that those are very opinionated and poorly thought out as an explanation. I would just ignore this. If you like flavor text, you can read it, but don't take any of it as serious advice, because it just does not at all compare with the gameplay. So we're looking at our nation here. Let's look at the basics of what we're looking at here. So at the top, we have our, main UI. This is all the important stuff. We can exit the game. This will go to the main menu. It won't literally leave the game. We go to our options, where we could change a lot of information whenever we want. You could change your graphical settings while you're in here, the different window types, your resolution. You can see all the key mappings. You can set specific things that would help. For example, if you're not good at managing supply, you can enable this one, and then you simply won't die to lack of supply. Like, you won't fully lose things. They'll just be penalized. They'll be weakened. You could do quick victory if you want the game to end sooner. This could be a very long game, so I would definitely recommend this if you do feel like it's getting dragged out. If you find that nations progress through the legacy system, which I have a whole guide towards, but we'll talk about today, then you might want to enable this. Or if you find that you can go from kind of stable to falling apart too quickly, then slower progress and decadence might be something that you want. Otherwise, change the difficulty whenever you want in the middle of the game, and this will dramatically change the game just the same amount as if you picked it at the beginning. It's not super important that it's on when you start or not. Just change it as to your preferences. Then we could save the game. Of course, I would recommend doing that. Otherwise, it will autosave every time you hit end turn. We do have our money. Money is, as we can expect it, it's used to help pay for things, especially your military, but also administrative burden. The larger your nation gets, the more you'll have to pay to administrative burden. The larger your military gets, the more you have to pay towards that. It comes from taxation, from commerce and trade, primarily, as well as having some passive monetary growth as well, and we'll talk more about that stuff as we go along. Manpower is mostly determined by the amount of population that you rule over entirely that are not slaves. Only citizens, not slaves, and it is consumed by your military. Through decisions, you can swap money for manpower for metal, and all around, again, they kind of pop up randomly in your decisions, which are located in the nation panel. We'll talk more about that later. Metal is a rarer thing. This is used to make more advanced military units primarily. Bigger boats, heavier infantry, things like that. If you live in a mountainous terrain and you're landlocked, then metal won't matter too much to you. Funny, because that's where you'd expect to find metal, right? But it won't matter that much to you because you're primarily going to need it for heavier infantries, heavier units, bigger boats, and this only really matters if you're fighting in plains and places that have more units that can fit in them. That's known as frontage. We'll talk about that more when we're talking about military. Then we have legacy. This is how you win the game. That quick victory I told you about, it basically makes it so that you need 2 times the legacy of the person that's just behind you compared to 3 times, and then you win the game. Otherwise, you have to make it all the way until turn 500, which, depending on how much you like the game or how you like long-term things, that may not be the coolest to you. So this is how that works. Legacy comes from a lot of places, and we'll get more in depth on that. But we're not done yet. There are more resources that we need to look at. Just click on any one of your regions, and then you'll see those extras. Namely, they are food, infrastructure, culture, and equipment. These are the ones that are not represented above. And generally speaking, these are all local, sort of. There are exceptions, primarily with culture. Allow me to briefly explain what culture and legacy are, because those are unique to this game. Culture is a representation of the culture of a nation. What makes it unique, what its peoples do, it having an identity. This is a good thing. You need it for multiple things. It allows you to increase and manage the loyalty, which if this gets too low, you have a rebellion, you don't want that. But it also allows you to manage decadence. Decadence is another resource, sort of, which you can see if you go into the nation panel. We could click it, and then you could see your decadence right here. It will always be right here, like the exact total amount. But we could also see it locally if we look at right here, the accumulated decadence in every single location. These numbers add up to give you that total amount that you actually have in your nation. After being modified by certain modifiers such as the age of your nation, which can be lowered through taking objectives that are set by your leader, as well as taking certain options in decisions that will pop up for you to take. The culture interacts with this through the historical culture value, which is a weighted value of your historic, so recent, and current culture production total every single turn. These get put up against each other for a ratio, and then that goes into a big ranking where if you're in the green, you're gonna progress through different civilization tiers, like going from being stable to glorious, or from a tribe to a monarchy, or a monarchy to an empire, for example, or even different types of tribes, really. But then you can also get aging tokens if you're in the red, and that will instead make you go backwards from glorious, for example, to stable, to old, to decadent, monarchy down to tribe, empire down to monarchy, that kind of stuff. These are where the tokens are represented. The top is progress, the bottom is decadence. Really, the higher up you get, the harder everything becomes to manage, and the harder it is to stay that successful. The lower you go, well, the lower you are, it can get easier. But if you're going backwards, you don't really want to go backwards, because if you're too decadent, you'll have rebellions. Your whole nation could just fracture. You can watch AI nations disappear off the map because they just completely collapse, because there is a % chance of that. Want to be careful with that. And then legacy is where culture can also interact, because culture can generate legacy, but other things as well. The further along you are in that progression, you'll just generate it from your government. If you have wonders, world wonders, national wonders, they can generate legacy as well. And if you take those objectives, as I mentioned, some decisions can affect it temporarily as well. This adds up to a total, which is right here, and this affects who's winning. And again, there is a ranking for that, where you can see the total legacy points, the income, and where they're coming from for pretty much everybody, an exact amount. Do note that if you use this ledger to get any other information, for example, money and income information on different nations, that those are estimates. You get mostly accurate information by just getting an alliance with someone that's really the most accurate way to do it. Let's glance at the rest of the UI in front of us that we have here. This money is not the same as this money. This is a local representation of money of, like, for example, this location, Latium, is earning us 12 positive money. We are earning 38 total, but this place is earning us 12. For all the resources that are up here, these numbers will not necessarily add up to these numbers because these numbers are accounting for the things that are subtracting as well. Now, infrastructure is local. It's affected by where you put population. There are two different population types that you really need to be concerned with. Citizens, which, they look kind of like this. The culture makes them look different. They're going to do better at the bottom two tasks, which is money and culture generation. The top two rows are better done by slaves, and this is your food and your infrastructure. Generally, and it's not exact, but I do find that slaves can sometimes further in the game even do better, just the higher up they are in these rows, and then the citizens can do better lower. So for example, I find especially your ethnicity, culture, citizen would do better in infrastructure than on food, and so instead you'd want your slaves there or your citizens that are not of your ethnicity. You do have a set ethnicity. If you hover over ethnicity, you can see national ethnicity is italic, so you can take that into account as well. There is a conversion rate and some buildings help with that. Infrastructure is a resource that is used to build buildings. Now, these local resources, unlike the ones that are up at the top, will actually accumulate locally instead of nationally. So infrastructure can accumulate to a certain amount locally. Food can do the same, as can equipment. And there are maximums, but they're not like very well outlined unless you start reading the manual. There is a manual for this game, and I do recommend reading it. It can be very helpful. But like most manuals for games like this, it doesn't explain a lot of things, especially the most important things. But the way this infrastructure works is if it's positive, let's get it positive, then if I go to buildings, I will be given proposals of buildings that I can select in different categories. Food, and the next one's healthcare, and then infrastructure, military, commerce, culture, and then I can also shuffle them for just take one turn to shuffle them because I don't like any of the options. Most of these will take a building slot, which they're represented here. You get building slots by having more population, but otherwise certain buildings can actually affect your total amount of slots. And some of them, like this one, are slotless. They don't use any slots. These ones tend to not be like the best, or maybe they can be because they're actually an upgrade of something else that's there. So keep an eye on that. You pretty much just build by what you need. You're lacking food? Well, maybe you want a ranch. You're lacking population growth? Well, maybe you need more food. Like, I don't have any food growth right now. Maybe I need some more food. Now we're going to have growth of population. A new one will be born in this many turns. They don't have to age. Born might be the wrong word. It'll be grown, like a plant, essentially. And these buildings can affect that. Food is good for getting food as a basis. But you can also get health. Each one health is actually a percentage, which is represented here. Don't assume everything that's a percentage is representing what you see up here, though. This only is the case for health. It is never the case for food or infrastructure. Please keep that in mind. But health is kind of a multiplier in a way. You see we have a health bonus of 12 in this tooltip, which is giving a 21 food discount on the growth of the next population, for which we currently need 154. It is not 21 off of that 154. There was an additional 21, but the 12% health bonus got rid of that 21. Infrastructure buildings will generally add to infrastructure. Now, just note, they don't always do what I'm saying. For example, when I get to culture, I'm going to tell you it's going to make culture, and it can add to loyalty. They don't all do that. Some food buildings add to loyalty. In fact, some infrastructure buildings actually create more building slots, and some health buildings can actually remove active slots that are being used, which is weird. And then military buildings are generally what generates equipment, which we haven't talked about yet, but we will. Resources can be generated. You see, needs leather. There's resources, needs lumber. It could be imported, or if you lack it, you just get penalized These resources can be generated by buildings across all of these different categories. The financial one is used for making money, but also heavily for metal. But metal can also come up in infrastructure. There's different tiers. You have to build the low tiers before the higher tiers unlock. You can see every building unlocked to you here. When you become familiar with the buildings, you'll be able to tell what tiers you have unlocked and when. Just note that if you have military units on a location, they will eat the food there, the stockpiled food. If you have a province, if you take over, for example, I'm going to hover over this to show you all or most of this, and then you form a province, which will pop up over here, then you can actually share those food reserves for this purpose. You can see the food usage of any stack right here by clicking on it, looking at food usage. You can also see where that food is going. It tells you like if the population is consuming it. I think it can tell you if a military is consuming it, but you could just check with the military itself. Food, stockpiled food in a singular location will be used in a siege. So having a stockpile is good, but you'll have to keep the growth in mind. When you grow, it'll all just be consumed. Separately, we have equipment. Equipment is that military equipment that can stockpile up. It's pretty much already maxed. This one actually tells you 108 equipment. You don't have to worry about that maxing out. It's not as important of a resource as literally anything else. You'll use it when you use it, and it will sit there when you don't, and there's really no harm because the other resources could never keep up with the amount of military production that you could do if you just started spending all of your equipment. This literally just exists as a gate to how quickly you can pump out new military units. Not anything to do with maintaining them. It's just that if I go recruit a unit right here, this button, and I want to recruit this Early Republic Legion, you'll see it'll take 50 equipment for the one. This is a very heavy unit, to be fair. 10 for this one. And if I add one to the queue, you'll see it'll come out of there. You can go into the negative by one turn because the amount you earn in the next turn will be consumed, just like the equipment you have stockpiled right now. Since the game works turn-based, this is how they've decided to handle this. And then if you go, see, that's like one turn, right? That's what we have. And then you see how it goes into 2 and 3. That's because we're consuming 50 each. So when we're here, we have 50. Add on 36, because that's what we'll make. We're not at another 50 yet, so we can't do that. But we can fit in something worth 10. See? Next turn. Next turn. Minus 25. Next turn, next turn. Now we're at minus 35. We have only one left. There's nothing that's like less consuming than this, but now that we go over the minus 36, it's like, nope, we can't do that. So that's how that works. While we're looking at this UI, let me brief you on it. These are just the resources. Again, it's just showing you what is relevant for the creation of your military units. These are military units you can create. This list will change as the game goes on. There will be decisions to upgrade them, and then it'll replace the old ones, but you'll unlock new ones. Like you'll get provincial units if you go ahead and make a province. Those are special, but I can represent them with these ones. We'll get to that. First, though, generally, you have your offensive stats. Simple things like attack, defense, hits, effectiveness. Hits is the amount of hits you do. This is valuable if you're on the offense, especially. You have effectiveness, which is kind of a health rating. It's basically what it is. You have a range attack, which is good if you're using the unit as like a bit of a skirmisher. You have flanking modifier, so if in the battle your unit moves forward and there's no enemy in front of it, but there is one to its side, then it will go ahead and attack that from the flank using the flanking modifier to give it a better or worse attack. Cavalry are an example, especially light cavalry are usually the best at flanking. Flanking modifier of 2, this shit goes up to like 4, maybe higher. What we have to note is your attack value is what gets used if you go somewhere and initiate a fight. If someone comes to you and initiates a fight, you're using your defense value. That's how it works. You do not use it for, like, defense doesn't work if you're taking a hit. You're still using your attack value because you're using dice. The modifiers are going on the dice. You're putting one dice roll up against another dice roll in the combat. That's how it works. And so you get the modifier based on simply who started the combat. Then we have also siege value and resist. Value is a positive modifier for if you can force a nation to surrender by sieging or breach the walls to enable an assault. Resist is your ability to resist this if you are in a location. Let me just briefly tell you about that. If I want to enter, I can right-click it or hit garrison when I'm in a location. Otherwise, if I'm moving, just select your army, select the location I want to move there. But wait, no, I don't want to move there. I want to go in the city because maybe I'm expecting it to be attacked and I want to defend the inside instead of having a fight on the outside. I can cancel that movement by simply right-clicking on the original location where the unit is. Now, instead of on the area around, I just hover over the city, see how it moves, right-click, and now we're going in there. As a side note, you can also right-click on an enemy stack if you see one, and then your unit will chase it around. This works on friendly stacks as well, in case you want a unit to go merge with one of your other stacks and just follow it. You don't want to micromanage it every turn. So that is something to keep in mind. Back to this stuff. Combat power is just a rating of generally how the devs say how good a unit is. You can ignore this. Learn the other stats. If you're new, sure, reference it. But this is about as helpful of a rating and a stat as the difficulty and the interest things on the nation selection. It is basically useless. It doesn't tell you anything worthwhile. So keep that in mind. And then you see how this says support unit. That is also important because support units, if they are behind a unit that's on the front doing an attack, which this is more likely the bigger your army is, or if you're fighting somewhere that has a small frontage, they will give a bonus to the dice roll of the unit engaged in combat. Support units will do this better than non-support units. Just to tell you about that frontage real quick, if we hover over this remaining UI that I haven't really covered, then you could see the important stuff here. We could see our terrain that we're on. We could see our frontage, terrain defense. If you have terrain defense, then that will help you in your defensive rolls. Frontage is how many units can fit on the front. Some units are dedicated to cavalry, actually. There are some slots that are cavalry only in a lot of terrains. Keep that in mind. Separate to that, while we are here, defensiveness is just a rating, a measure of defensiveness of the region. This is another abstract value that I wouldn't really put any stock into. I would rather hover over this and see will defend with approximately 15 units. That's more information to me if I already know what units will be defending. And so if we go back to the units, like I know defenses are usually made up of urban militia, but I know certain buildings will actually add to the garrison. They will usually tell you if it's going to be like a medium infantry or a siege unit, for example. Some will add these large siege engines. So that's good to keep in mind. Urban militia usually comes from population enabling these kinds of defenses. But separate to all of this information, move speed, that's just how much you could move in one turn. If every location took you exactly one movement point, then you could move 6. However, terrain and roads will interact with that. If there are any other bonuses you need to know about your units, you could see them probably right around here. Agile, for example, will give this one bonuses in forested and rough terrains. Now, if you go look at a terrain, you can see on this tooltip, it says plain. That is not forested. That is not rough. This one says hill. Do either of these apply? One of them does. Can you tell which one? Let's hover over this again. Forested is dark green. Rough is brown. Plain is light green. Hill is brown. Rough and hill are the same. Hill is a type of rough terrain. There are multiple. It color codes them for you. If you're colorblind, I'm sorry. There really isn't a better way to figure this out except to learn what all the different types are, which might be listed in the manual. Skirmisher. This is just a rating of how good of a skirmisher a unit is. It can inflict extra fatigue. What that means is like a debuff to the enemy dice roll, because fatigue can be inflicted in combat, so keep that in mind. And then I'll also tell you what type of unit you're looking at, skirmisher versus heavy infantry. This is distinct, because heavy infantry usually do not do well in non-open terrains, and you don't want skirmishers on the front, ideally, but you do want some form of cavalry, etc. At the bottom here, you could see a bunch of numbers. The ones that do not have a plus are the amount of that currency that will be consumed when you create a unit, just like that equipment right there. The pluses indicate the permanent upkeep that you will be paying for each type of unit. The asterisk indicates that there will actually be a upfront increase to money for every one of these units that you have. Not that you make, that you have. So, for example, if it costs 10 gold to make, and it will increase by 25% like it does right here, then the next one would cost like 12.5. It won't represent the decimal, but that's roughly how much it would cost. That is if you already have one and exactly one. Now, if I make one of these units, the cost does not go up because the unit is not made yet. So I can make multiple in one turn paying this original cost. If I want to try to be cost effective in some way, I need to work that into my calculations. That is usually something that is applied only to provincial units, but nations like Rome that are more in depth are different, and some of their units, like the early Republic Legion here, has different rules than a lot of the other normal heavy infantry in the game, but also very different stats and penalties and bonuses. Let's close out on some military information. So if I have a stack, I can split it in half, like literally immediately, just like that. Splits it in half, does its best job. I can merge them together again. If I want to, I can select specific things by just simply clicking on them. I could click on them again if I want to unselect them. You don't have to control or shift click. It's just normal clicks. That's it. Which could be good and bad. And then if I hit split with these selected, it will split exactly them. Every army has a general. If you swap generals, or even implement one where there was not one, then stars will disappear from these unit cards. That's their experience. They're losing experience because now they have to reorganize, get used to training. Training is done passively in the background, but can also come from battle experience with their new leader. So keep that in mind. It's better to have a leader than not to have a leader. A leader with 0 offense and defense rating and no perks will give bonuses still to units that would make that better than not having a general. Offense rating and defense rating are direct bonuses to the dice rolling, so look at that. But also traits. Think about this. This guy's relentless. He gives a movement bonus. He gives a defense penalty for the entire stack. Sometimes there's like conditions for this. For example, this guy would be a good admiral. He'd give a movement bonus, specifically in coastal waters. If he was in control of a land army, that would maybe not be very useful. But we have all these different things that you have to consider. Leaders do have an age. They can die, they will die, and they are kind of determined how much you have by a couple things. Number one is your military expertise on top of a base. It'll give, for example, high military expertise will give +2. Nations can have a military expertise that is like innate, but their leaders can affect it as well. Now, Rome is different because most nations have leaders, not parties. And those leaders can have military expertise of their own, which then affects your base. But like I said, Rome is different. A lot of these more in-depth nations will be different. There are also buildings in the higher tiers of military that will give you more slots for this. So something to keep in mind, right, is you have to build the low tiers to get the high tiers. Build enough tier 1s, you'll unlock tier 2. That will unlock something like the military academy. That will unlock slots. You can rename an army at any time here. It's just for your own organization. Blah, 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 blah. There you go. You can choose to assault anything that you are besieging. You're going to want some breaches in the walls, though, before you do that. You'll be able to see that through a tooltip when you click on a location that is being besieged by you or anyone, to be honest, so long as you can see it. You can, garrison we saw will just send you into a city in a location you're already at. Retaliate is good if you want to just fight someone but not take over a region. So for example, if I were to go into the Etruscan lands and just I wanted to fight this, not start a besieging, I just turn on retaliate. I'll go in, I'll fight, and then I'll come back. And that's what retaliate is. And then I can disband. You can then sort through provinces as well as units by using these tools right here. They have tooltips to tell you what they do. And if you need information, you could try these info little things. And again, there is a manual in case this stuff is not enough, which honestly, it won't be. Now, let's cover trade real quick. If you use this trade details little button here, you can get a bunch of information on every single location you select, such as naturally occurring trade goods that are already there, things that you are manufacturing through buildings, things that you are importing because a building or need is requiring them and there is somewhere to get it, missing ones because they either cannot be imported or they simply are not available within a trade range. These are the kind of important required ones, and then there's ones here that could be granting you bonuses on top of the normal function of a building. It's less important. You can see the trade range of every particular region that you click on. You can see the commerce bonuses, which could come from your leaders, it could come from your buildings and other things, events even. This will give you bonus commerce income, which can be more important than taxes, certainly. And trade acumen, which determines your likelihood to get access to trade goods or to sell your own to someone else to export it. Higher the acumen, the better the chances. None of this stuff is done manually. This is all done pretty much automatically, except for you maybe acquiring these bonuses. And then you can see your import-export ratio and how you profit from that, separate to the actual income of the location, which also accounts for structures and taxes and, you know, separate from your top income here, which is accounting for literally everything. Since it just reset my filter here, my map overlay, we could talk about those real quick. All map overlays can be found at the bottom right. They all have different things. You have ownership, population, supply. These all give you different information, like how populated a place is. The darker the color, the more full the location is. Supply will show you, well, supply, if it's good. If you want to see supply on a specific military unit, just click on it, and it will actually color code it now based on the supply that this specific military stack requires. A lot of these tell you the color coding, and just note that that will pretty much apply to everything, this color coding list. There are some variances, but they do a pretty good job at explaining what all of these do. You can also find any region or nation on the map. This is one of the more useful, like, Control F features I've ever seen in a video game. Definitely use this, especially if you see there's an event that requires you to go somewhere specific. This will be very useful for finding it. Now let's talk about diplomacy. There's two ways to access diplomacy. This button up here or this button down here. Regardless of which one you pick, you'll enter the same diplomatic screen. You could see information about how much other nations like you or dislike you, just, you know, the numbers from here. You could see if you have any requests from any nations. Clicking on them here will just kind of bring you to that nation without you needing to find it on the map. And any treaties that you already have. You can see if you're at war with anybody and some information like how far you are into that civilization progress stuff and who your leader is, which again for Rome is going to be different. If we do select a nation, we'll have a bunch of options. War means we'll go to war. Alliance, this is how we become allied. These are pretty like one-off things here. There's a lot of modifiers we could see that will affect this kind of stuff. You can ask a nation to declare war on another nation. You could offer them a gift of money. You see that one just immediately does it. That's what war and alliance does as well. You could always go back and click on the nation again in the diplomacy screen and just cancel whatever you offered by clicking it. It won't actually go through until you hit end turn. You could insult someone. Now, the difference between giving a gift and insulting is relations, of course. Not just directly, but kind of third party as well. So if I insult the Celts, for example, then since the Etruscans don't like them, the Etruscans will like me more. If I give a gift to the Etruscans, the Celts will like me less. That's kind of how that works. And then if we want to make peace, there will only be one button here. If we're at war with someone, pull it up and we'll have a bunch of options here. It's going to be only slightly different than if we are negotiating with somebody that we're not at war with, but here's how that looks. Your stance is kind of how generous or dickish you're being. So if I demand that... Oh, wrong way. If I demand that they join me, it'll be like, well, that's impossible. They're never going to accept that. It could say that I'm being rude as well, basically. But it could also say I'm being very generous, depending on how much war score there is. It could be very negative, be very positive. The better deal you give someone in anything, the more they will like you after the fact. But the final peace chance is their chance to actually accept this information. Or if we're looking at a normal transaction, it's just transaction chance, but it's kind of the same thing. A chance for the transaction to go through and what is affecting it. And now it is bargain points instead. The wording changes a little, but it's the same. No matter what side you're looking at, you kind of have the same options. If you do offer some kind of option, for example, if you're trying to take things in war, you won't be able to give things. Peace treaties are not a trade. You could change who's offering like so. There's a lot of things to tell you. The black right here is pointing at the one that is giving whatever you are putting here. Requesting from the Etruscans. It's highlighted, right? And then we do this. If we hover over, it'll even specify that Rome is asking the Etruscans to become a client state. Requesting from them, highlighted. Highlighted, Rome offering. The Etruscans are asking Rome to become a client state. So you see how that works here. Client states are little protectorates that will join you in your wars. Cooperation is kind of just like a friendship treaty, really. And it can also give bonuses to the ability to trade with each other, alliances as well. Absorb nation, so if you want to absorb a nation, but this is really, really hard to get to go through though, as is becoming a client state, but it's definitely possible. Then you could just, trade money, metal, manpower, we went over those. You could also trade regions and entire provinces once they're formed. This can go into peace treaties as well. You could provide units. So when you have a province, you can actually send someone provincial units. You do have to pay the resources required for them, the base price, and they have to pay for the transportation. But generally, when AI offer this, and they will try to give you the resources required, or at least some value that can be equivalent, or maybe more. This is a good way to support another nation, and you can kind of determine who's taking the biggest burden of the cost of these by simply I can offer them the units and then ask for the metal, manpower, and money that it would cost on my end. This is better to use with players, but still. And then there's objectives. I mentioned you could take objectives. Here's an example of an objective. You could see it hovering around the location. The leader will pick this. You don't get to pick this. You pick it, you get a progress token. The nation becomes super happy. Your age will be reduced. This means less decadence, which is always good. It's great. But you can relinquish these if you want. The reason that you could do this is if they relinquish on you, they'll be less likely to go to war with you to take those objectives. That is a real effect. If you relinquish on them, then they will like you more, because if you have any on them, they will be unhappy, and this will come out of your transaction chance, costing you more money, manpower, whatever, in anything you're trying to get to go through with them. Whenever you want to leave this window, it's very simple. Just cancel. It'll prompt you are you sure you want to do this? If you are offering things, but yeah, keep that in mind. And then at the bottom left here, by the way, there is a message log. If you've played other age-odd games, this should be very familiar with you. This is just a summary of everything that you know of that's happening. You don't really need this because there's a lot of pop-ups that will give you this information already anyway, but if this helps you understand what's going on, feel free to use it. I want to mention one more thing before we start exploring the nation panel, which should essentially be the last segment we have here, which is at the beginning of the game here, the nations you see are not all the nations in the game. Some have not formed yet. They can form out of these things right here, primarily. These places that are independent of full nation rule. You can attack these at any point. If I move on to this right now, I don't have to be at war with it. That's an attack, because that is an independent, tribe in a way, based on whatever culture it says, italic. This is essentially an italic tribe that lives without any established government to have diplomacy with. So keep that in mind. These are like free attacks. They can and will grow a defensive force that will spawn a stack and then start invading neighbors. So if you're near one, you're going to want to treat them as a dangerous location, either to be subjugated or defended against. Eventually, most of the map will simply not have these, and more can open up. A cheesy way to see it is to open the movement overlay. You see all these little places here? These will open up eventually as time goes on. The same goes for up here and around here and all of this. The earliest place you'll ever see turn into a nation usually is right around here. They'll kind of form a new Germanic nation up here pretty reliably. If a nation's ever fully wiped out, it can come back. Simply if it's in the correct sort of area with the correct culture that kind of owns it, and it could form these nations even as they are deleted. They can come back from the pool that is like available of predetermined nations. You're not gonna see new ones pop out. You can see like Roman usurpers, Carthaginian usurpers. Those are rebels. Those are different. They'll never form a usurper nation because those are their own mechanic. Now, in the nation panel, we have a lot of information, a lot of which we've gone over. Progress, decadence, legacy, the different civilization types that you can move between, the age, we've gone over all that, the leader. You can get information down here in the overview. Your general loyalty, the citizen slaves you have, slave markets you have total in your nation. These are pretty important because slave markets can spawn events, and slaves captured will go to the nearest slave market, and they can affect decisions and other things quite a bit. Something to keep in mind. If you're at wars, it'll tell you the enemy, army, and fleet strength compared to you, and you can see your own here. The modifiers we saw in the beginning, we can also see here kind of in real time what they do. Get reminded of what we have. Again, there are decisions where you could change some of these, usually ones like this right here, the builders, and usually your leaders can change other ones, like this one is granting this, but most leaders will change things like this among some others. Some things are nation-based, some things are pretty shared or government-based, etc. There can even be decisions that kind of work like research that come up very rarely. They can give you permanent bonuses to things like this. You could get like 5% bonuses at a time to food, infrastructure, money, or culture generation. That's a thing that'll pop up. Keep an eye on your decisions. They last for about 12 turns, usually, before they expire. And you won't always be able to do all of them. Like this one we can't do yet, but it will expire. But still, usually they'll all come back. If you ever wish to see your current objectives set by your leader, you could see them right here. Ones that you own versus ones that you don't own. Important to know what to hold, or you will get aging tokens or lose progress tokens. And then important to know what to take for the exact opposite reason, essentially. Plus, getting rid of age. So keep all that in mind. It's just basically information. There's stuff I haven't covered here, but this is already a very long guide. I hope this guide's been helpful to you. Again, check the playlist in the description below. If I didn't go as in-depth on something as you wanted, I've probably gone that in-depth on it already in that playlist, or I intend to in a future guide. Regardless, if you do have any other questions, ideally after checking those videos, right? Please leave those in the comments below. If I can't answer your question, hopefully somebody else can. And if I already have a video on it and you just haven't seen it, I will try to direct you in that direction. If you have suggestions for future guides that you might want to see, leave that in the comments below as well. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.